you like to come up with like a bullet point kind of, or no?
I
Just
don't
are talking
need-
about it?
yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
I mean, we kind of usually shoot from the hip, right?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Like we know how many bullets we got, but that's about it. We don't know when they're gonna go off or where they're gonna go. Pew pew. I like your gun sound.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Middleish, the podcast about moderation in all things. I'm Erin Green.
And I am Michael Cray.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, we were playing chicken. We were doing chicken. Who's going to do it first? We were being so polite to each other. Usually we're like racing to it, but today we were playing polite chicken.
Yeah.
How are you, chicken?
We're practicing some restriction, which is what we're going to be talking about. Oh, restriction here.
Yeah.
Restrain yourself.
Restraint. I'm good. Yeah. It's been a good week. It's starting to, well, it feels like it's cooling off a little bit. We'll see if it trends that way. I mean, it's going to soon, but I hope so. It was like, I think 82 here yesterday. So not bad. Humidity wasn't bad, but I'm hoping. I'm ready for like some mid 70s. Right in
I think it's funny that you're all excited about this cool off that's happening across, the West, because we just got our tent top for our pickup. We went and I picked up the Go Fast camper. We got it installed, and Matt and I are like, we've still got a few nice weekends left. We can go, we're going to go like the first weekend we're going to go blah, blah, blah. We had picked a place, go down to the City of Rocks, maybe do some hiking, maybe ride our bikes. And we actually have a cold snap coming. And when I mean cold snap, like the overnight lows in the City of Rocks are going to be like 7-8 degrees. And the daytime highs are going to be in the 30s. And we're just like, shit, even we're diehards, right? Like we want to take the camper, but man, that's
a little chilly.
That's going to be like putting on layers of long underwear and all the down we own and staying huddled in the tent because we can't, go outside or whatever. So anyway, we're still trying to figure out what we're going to do. We might not drive so far from home lest it be, intolerable in the cold.
What you do is you need a couple dogs to get in there with you because they will keep it nice and warm. My brother and I, I don't know how many years ago this was, a long time ago. We went camping in February up there in Boise, up by Idaho City.
Yeah.
And we had his two dogs, and it was so freaking cold, right? Like in the morning, we woke up and like our plates that we left out were like frozen to the ground, and it was like a little dusting of snow. But we had his two dogs in the tent with us in a 2-person tent. And I'm not kidding you, somewhere around like 2 or 3 in the morning, like I pulled off my sleeping bag and I was just like, oh, I'm so hot with these freaking dogs in here. That's like, you just get a couple dogs, borrow someone's dogs for the trip.
Well, Rally did show some curiosity with the tent. So if we could train him to come with us, I'm sure he'd burrow himself in the bottom of our sleeping bag and
keep your feet toasty.
Well, so the guy who installed the camper, I asked him, have you taken this winter camping? And he goes, I lived in mine all last winter. And my brother was laughing because he was like, yeah, where did he winter? Arizona? No, he wintered in Bozeman, Montana.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's that's
Is
tough.
It like canvasy material or?
Yeah, it's just like a tent, know, but I mean, you're sleeping on memory foam on top of like this. I don't think there's like a plastic kind of honeycomb, like a thick, platform. And then it has the memory foam and you're off the ground. So you're not getting that cold from the frozen ground. So, I mean, I think it's warm. He said the coldest he slept in was, I think, 14 below or something insane. Jeez. And I just looked at him like, you're nuts. And he goes, I'm not saying it was comfortable, but I survived.
I didn't die. So, I mean, isn't that what we're going for here?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Buy our tents. You won't die.
Well,
the
I
water.
camped by myself going up there, which I've never done before. And you learn a lot about what happens in your mind when you're camping by yourself in bear country.
Sure.
Yeah. So I slept in the tent by myself and I had my down bag, which is nice and cozy, but it's not super cold rating. It's like to 30 degrees or something. And then I had this like big down blanket that I basically just burritoed myself into and just like cover it all up and get swaddled up. And I stayed warm, but it got down in the mid 20s that night. It was pretty chilly, but
So you're worried
single
about
digits.
bears and made yourself look like a burrito.
Exactly. I know. I didn't make myself smell like a burrito, though.
Okay,
That
that's
is the
good.
key.
Didn't smear beans on the outside of your sleeping bag.
No, I didn't roll myself in cheese or, you know,
Hmm.
anyway. Yeah.
That would have been an adventure. Yeah, I think we have different versions of cooling off. You up there in Boise and me down here in Houston. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I'm fine with. Last winter down here, I did not miss that cold. Not even
Yeah.
once. Yeah. So
Once it starts snowing, I'm okay with the cold. Like once I shift gears in my mind and especially in my sports world, because right now it's just, you can't go skiing yet because there's no snow anywhere.
Right.
And you can't ride your bike when some people do.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be fun for me to go ride my bike when it's below 40. Like
Right.
45 is a pretty good like threshold for me.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I hope it cools off for you.
Yeah, me
Somebody's
too.
got to be enjoying
Thanks.
it.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, let's do this, huh? We're talking about restriction.
Food
Restriction.
restriction in
Food
particular.
restriction. Yeah, and what that
Yeah.
does to your mind and body and emotions when you restrict for a long time.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
not going to get too sciency on it because I mean, there's so much you can get into with
Yeah.
hormonal shifts that happen and the way your muscles and your fat tissue respond and all of that stuff. But we'll really just talk about kind of the real life, appetite effects, psychological effects, and then some of the physical effects that happen with food restriction. And I think this is important to address because the vast majority of the clients I've worked with who are actively trying to lose weight believe that they have to be hungry, that there are good and bad foods. There are foods they are allowed to eat and not allowed to eat. And they go into this very conscious and active restriction.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of nuance here and we'll kind of unpack it all. But I think a lot of it is kind of how you tell yourself and how you approach that.
Right.
Right. And instead of really being, what's the word I'm looking for? Like present and kind to yourself and mindful about how this is going and very practical in your approach.
Yep.
Yeah. And the whole calorie counting thing plays into that. Oh, I should only be eating, 1,200 calories a day kind of thing when you're, a grown adult who is active. That's
right. Yeah. I think my kids eat more than 1,200 calories. I'm not joking. So yeah, I think, and I want to say this just so anyone listening, we're just kind of all on the same page here. If someone's wanting to lose weight, right? Like there has to be, we have to reduce intake from where it currently is. Okay. Like we have to eat fewer calories. So, but that can look wildly different. So we're not knocking on losing weight or, being mindful of eating less if you're trying to lose weight, that kind of thing. What we are knocking on is that term restriction. Now, what I think of is like, if you're somewhere and there's a restricted area, that means you don't get to go there. Like it's off limits. Okay. And there's a big difference between trying to eat less foods while still having freedom to eat all the things you like, and increasing your mindfulness and that kind of stuff, and eating less food by just saying this stuff I don't get to do. It's off limits. It's bad. It's a no-no. And if I do it, I'm failing. These are two very different approaches to kind of the same goal. And so I think I just want to make it clear from the get-go that, if we're talking about restriction, we're not talking about being mindful of eating less or paying attention to hunger cues, or portion sizes, that kind of stuff. This is a whole separate thing.
Yeah. And I think of restriction as having sort of these really hard, inflexible rules.
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of different well, we can talk about some of the various forms of restrictive eating that I think kind of come to my mind when I think of severe restriction. So some are just restricting entire foods or food groups from the eating patterns. So one of the most common ones we've seen in recent years is like gluten-free eating, well, look at the kinds of foods that are suddenly removed from the eating pattern if somebody is gluten-free.
Right.
Now, if somebody has celiac disease or is gluten intolerant and they actually have reactions to gluten, it's a different story as to why we're restricting gluten or why we're avoiding gluten.
Right.
But when it comes to pursuing weight loss or, whatever else, and you're restricting entire food groups, or like dairy is another common one. People go dairy free, or people go completely meat free. They're vegan. They get into this kind of restrictive mindset. Again, I work with a lot of different eating patterns. In fact, I just had somebody reach out to me and say, "Hey, I see you promote chocolate milk. Would you work with somebody who's dairy free?" Of course I would. And yes, I feel very comfortable with, working with all kinds of eating patterns. I think the difference is, you're laughing, you're getting a kick out of that one.
I am. I have something to say about that when you're through.
You will drink your milk and you will like it.
Well, yeah, exactly. Right. Because that's what people think. Like, if you like something, then the assumption is like, oh, I have to do that, because that's the way so much of this industry works, is like, someone's like, hey, I like, gluten-free. So you must do gluten-free if you work with me. And I think that's what people are assuming, right? Like, oh, so I'm going to have to drink chocolate milk if I work with Erin.
Right. And that speaks into some of the anecdotal, messaging that people get when they look at specific diet patterns or restriction or fad diets or whatever, promotion kind of things from influencers. They get that messaging and all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, that's what works for this person, or that's what this person says. And so all of a sudden that's the road I need to go down.
Right.
Now, what I'm trying to articulate, and maybe not doing a great job of, is restricting a very specific food or group of food from your eating pattern, A, does not guarantee weight loss. B, does not guarantee health improvement or mitigating health risk. Right. And C, is probably going to backfire on you if you really enjoy that particular food and you have absolutely no reason to restrict it other than believing that maybe if I just go gluten-free, I'll lose weight.
Right. Like, that's the magic bullet. And I think there's a cycle that people who find themselves often going to these restrictive places to lose weight. And I think it's probably safe to say that most of the people that find themselves doing this maybe aren't as concerned with their health. They're more concerned with the scale or the size. Like, this is the goal. And I think when people often find themselves returning to these, restrictive approaches, is they're looking for, it's the magic thing, right? Like, oh, gluten's my problem. Oh, sugar's my problem. Oh, a food that has an ingredient that I can't pronounce, that's my problem. And I think it's reducing things to, it's an oversimplification of, it's weird. It's an oversimplification, but it makes things exponentially more difficult.
Yeah, exactly.
It's this inverse relationship there. But it's just too simple. And it's often, like you said, that, yeah, there are some people who really need to avoid gluten. I've had clients that have celiac. They need to avoid gluten, or they're really gluten intolerant. They eat it and they do not do well, That's a thing. If you're not one of those people, gluten's not your problem,
Mhm.
right? Like, yeah. And I think people find themselves returning to these things and just seeking like I said, that magic bullet, right? Like, what's the thing? I just got to figure out what the ingredient is that's causing so much trouble. And I think this is why they find themselves jumping from fad diet to fad diet to fad diet, because fad diets, here you go. It's really simple. It's just this one thing. Avoid that
Here
and you'll
are
be
your
fine.
rules.
Right.
Here's what you can and can't eat.
Yeah, there's no depth. There's no internal work. There's no, mindfulness or awareness or insight into what your relationship is with food, all that kind of stuff. That's really critical for long-term success.
Yeah.
And that's why people keep returning to these things, is because they haven't been successful with them,
Yep.
but
And
the
so,
industry preaches this is what you got to do.
oh yeah, this is
Yeah.
how you have to do it. And
Yeah.
I'm there are two things that you said that I want to respond to. And one is exactly what you just ended with. This is the messaging that we've been getting our entire lives. You must restrict and go into this. What happens is it forces you into this scarcity mindset. And we'll
Mhm.
kind of dive into that in a little bit. But you must restrict and eliminate and set up this set of rules for
Yeah.
yourself in order to achieve X.
Right.
What is X? What are you trying to achieve by eliminating or restricting
Yeah.
or avoiding certain foods and changing your eating pattern? And that's a very clear, or I guess I should say, a very important question that I will ask people. And when they get into, oh, I want to try this, I want to try this eating pattern or getting rid of this food, what
Mhm.
are you hoping to accomplish? And what has told you that this is the way to go?
Right.
And if you do choose to go into a food restrictive eating pattern, okay, so you're eliminating gluten or dairy, or and I'm picking on like the low hanging fruit here. These are the very common ones that people are, oh, I'm dairy free, I'm, wheat free, whatever. If you choose to go that route, I want you to not only go fully into it, and I mean, not just kind of like, oh, sometimes I try it and I try to do this and once in a while. If you really think this is a culprit for you health wise and you think this is going to help you, let's do this. Let's make sure that we um, hold on to the integrity of your diet, the nutritional integrity, and make sure
Mhm.
that you're getting the nutrients you need and the satisfaction you need by, replacing some of those eliminated foods with appropriate alternatives.
Right.
Also, let's keep track of how it feels in your
Mhm.
body. Let's keep
Mhm.
track of the mindfulness that this may or may not create for you as you go down this road. Because I think a lot of what happens with this is people will say, oh, I'm gluten free. But then I'll never forget, I went to a Super Bowl party years ago when gluten free was just like at its height. And I'm just going to say on a side note here, I think that it's really, really wonderful what has happened with our uh, food supply and food world and awareness of the importance of gluten free
Mhm.
um, foods for people who really do need that dietary pattern.
Right.
So I'm not knocking this, I'm using it as a very common example that people think is going to be the magic bullet. So I go to the Super Bowl party and I was texting my friend, what should I bring? And she, I kind of threw out some ideas and she was like, well, um, no carbs or something. She made a comment like no carbs, like don't bring anything with carbs. And I was like, okay, I'll bring you like some, veggies and something else, whatever. So I come up there and there's like tortilla chips everywhere. And she's just like eating the tortilla chips. And I was like, I thought I'm kind of curious. Are you doing the low carb thing? Like what was this? And she goes, oh, these are gluten free. And just kept eating them. And I just was like, oh my gosh, this is a prime example of like this sort of bizarre belief that we create in our minds. And I will
Mhm.
say that and this can go into the psychological effects of restriction, when you set this very specific rule on yourself, it is in your nature to find a loophole to override
Right.
or a workaround for that rule. So in this case, this person had decided that, even though she was technically trying to do this low carb thing, she made a concession in that, oh, tortilla chips are gluten-free.
Right.
So very, very interesting loophole there.
Yeah, it's a good point, because it's been very often that when working with someone, a new client who has been a part of a really restrictive diet, has been, following a restrictive diet, they're often like, well, yeah, I do low carb, except I do da 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 da, or I don't eat gluten except da 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 da. And it's not this wholehearted, I'm in this. It's, well, I'm going to put one foot in the water. So hopefully I get the weight loss that this is supposed to bring about. But I'm also going to keep one foot in this camp, because doing that really sucks. If I go in wholeheartedly,
right.
like, that really sucks and I don't want to do it. So I'm going to make some concessions and keep these other foods going
Right.
around.
Well, and then ask them when somebody says, I stopped eating X. So they entered into some kind of dietary restriction with a very specific food. I'll ask, well, what are you eating instead?
Yeah.
What has replaced X? And very often it's increased plant intake, or they just don't snack as often mindlessly. They're drinking a lower calorie milk alternative instead of milk. So there's just all of these different factors that play into that. So whenever somebody is going into that very inflexible rule, kind of, this food is allowed and this one isn't, I'm always curious, like, what are you doing instead? Because I think that's a very important
It's real
factor.
important. Yep. And I think, and I'm not knocking anybody that's done restrictive diets. I just think this is often the case, is that it's really interesting for me to ask why. Like, oh, I've been trying to do gluten-free. Why?
Yeah. What are you hoping to get out of this?
To lose weight. And if your answer to that question is to lose weight, that's a big red flag that you should not be doing this, right? Like, this is a backwards approach. But it's also interesting to say, okay, so what about this do you think is going to lend itself to lose weight? And almost 100% of the time, people have no idea, right? Like, so why do you think that low carb is going to help you lose weight? Because it does.
I read this article, or my friend tried it, and
because everybody knows that carbs are a problem, or what about gluten-free is going to help? Do you even know what gluten is? And I think there's often a real lack of understanding what's behind these things, because fad diets don't get into that. Fad diets don't care about that, because fad diets fall apart when you do that, right? Like, if you get into like what's happening here, the fad diet, the magic bullet piece, it goes away, but I think it's really easy for us to go like, oh, that's the new thing. That's what I'm doing. And I remember people talking to me about, like, when gluten-free kind of like hit and got really big, it was just like, well, I'm doing gluten-free now. And it's like, why? Well, because that's what I'm supposed to do, right? That's what the magazines tell me. And some celebrities said it. So that's what we do. It doesn't matter if I understand it all. I don't even know what gluten is. I don't even know what foods it's in. I just know that I need to look for gluten-free.
Right.
And that's the thing. It's like, I remember seeing, like, I think it was like a jar of salsa or something that said gluten-free. And it's like, why in the hell would gluten be in a jar of salsa?
I've
makes
seen
zero
like these
sense.
boxed dessert mixes and different things that are gluten-free, but then you flip it over and you read the label and it's still just a boxed processed food product. So again, like that, it's really important to get into some of the why and the messaging, and so anyway, we're sorry. We both love gluten, but we understand when people can't have it or choose not to. This is just a really good example, because I think it has been around for so long that a lot of people are finally coming on the other side of realizing, I tried the gluten-free thing and it didn't yield the results I was hoping for.
Right.
Okay. Right. And along those lines, a lot of people will go into a restrictive dietary pattern with a culprit like gluten or wheat or dairy, or, those are very common ones, hoping that they will remedy some kind of digestive issue or skin issue or energy issue. And they really believe they do have a bona fide food intolerance. Again, the critical piece of that is going all in on
Right.
it. And I would strongly encourage working with a dietitian or somebody who has enough experience in that realm that they can guide you in a healthful way and maintain that nutrition integrity of your diet. But then also you have to keep track of your symptomology and how this feels in your body, how this feels in your mind. What foods do you miss from that restriction? How can we actually make the food world still satisfying and enjoyable for you, even with this restriction in place? So,
Yeah.
That's another thing is people who do go down that route because they're having, an issue with digestion or whatever, don't fully examine it and commit to it and decide,
Right.
If this is going to work or not. And there is evidence that if you have gone through a period of restriction with this food and you may or may not notice an improvement, some people are really afraid to introduce it back in and say, oh, what's going to happen when I, eat a piece of bread or something. Well, let's be slow with the reintroduction just to make sure.
Right.
And again, keep track of how it feels in you. Be mindful about it. Start with some small portions, start with some foods that you have tolerated really well in the past and just do kind of this systematic reintroduction of that food.
Right.
I've met people that go vegetarian for months at a time, and then they go eat a bacon cheeseburger. It's my one like meat meal. And they feel terrible.
Yeah,
No
of course
shit.
you do. Of course you do.
I'm like, no kidding. I mean, you just loaded your body with like this totally heavy, and I mean, it does take a different, digestive process for your body to break down that intact protein that way and all of the fat that's associated with it. And you got a sodium load in there, and it's a large meal that your body isn't used to having,
Yep.
Sure. It might cause some problems. Like maybe let's baby step our way into that reintroduction.
Might spend some time, setting up camp in the bathroom for a day or two.
Yeah. Maybe
get some toilet paper.
Exactly.
Stock up.
So one of the other most common eating patterns that has to do with restriction, I think, is intermittent fasting. Do you run into a lot of people that are interested in that?
I did years ago, not so much now. I feel like it's kind of, I still see it like on Instagram and stuff, but I feel like it's kind of lost its popularity to a degree. Yeah, not a whole lot anymore. I think, one of the funny things about intermittent fasting to me is like, well, that's what we all do when we go to sleep and then we wake up and like, that's why it's called breakfast. It's breaking the fast. Like we're all fasting and we're asleep. We're all intermittent fasting. It's just, you only get to call it that if you do it for this amount of time. Yeah. So I've always found that.
But you got to have a protocol, and you got to have it's got to be bigger. It can't just be, a standard 10 to 12 hour fast or whatever a lot of people will experience. But
yeah, technically we're all fasting in between lunch and dinner, right? And breakfast and lunch, like we're not eating. So at what point does it become a miracle cure? 7.5 hours? No, 8. Oh my God. World of
right. Yeah. And I run into this a lot with athletes. Athletes want to try intermittent fasting because they think it will yield a performance improvement. So they think it's going to, they read all this stuff about how you're, the hormonal shifts that happen with long-term fasting. And we're talking, more than just an overnight fast or more than just between meals, in a standard human's day. What they fail to see, like they'll read this evidence that's coming out that seems pretty valid and reliable. And they're like, well, I'm going to try this. Okay. What the evidence tells us about intermittent fasting is that there may be hormonal shifts and adaptations that occur with this. There may be a metabolic shift in terms of like what energy utilization your body will move into, more fat burning, less reliance on carbs. I see this a lot with endurance athletes that want to try intermittent fasting or low carb or all this other stuff, so they get into this restrictive kind of mindset. What we don't see is any of these, little biometric, biomarkers that are coming out translating to improved performance.
Right.
We're not seeing that in the evidence, in at least not in a strong enough, reliable way that I will recommend this for an athlete.
Right.
And then again, I keep promising we're going to get into the psychological part, but man, I will tell you that I've played around with some of the fasting protocols. I've played around myself with some of the, carbohydrate cycling protocols. And when you're training at a very high level, especially in endurance sports, it screws with your mind when you really get into that. I cannot eat until this time, or I cannot eat that, even though that is really what my body is telling me I need right now.
Yeah.
I think that the mental energy that people spend trying to restrict their diet in these ways, trying to fit their body into this very specific box of body fat percentage and composition, and this is what I should look like in my sport, this is what everybody else looks like in my sport. The mental energy that is required for you to do that, if it is not coming at like a pretty reasonable amount of effort, if it's overwhelming you and that's all you're thinking about, think of what you could accomplish if you apply that mental energy toward your training, your workouts, your planning your day, spending time with your family.
Your emotional
so
health.
many other, there's so many other things that could actually reap benefits. And there's a large camp that say, some of these hormonal shifts that people swear by in intermittent fasting are the similar kind of hormonal shifts that we will see with consistent exercise and training adaptations. But if you don't give your body the right kind of substrate to work with, or the right kind of fuel, those adaptations will not be as profound as they could be. So you're missing out on those adaptations in hopes of getting these adaptations elsewhere. So, I mean, it's kind of canceling each other out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And that's good. That's great stuff. I think it's so important to consider, because we often go like, well, we think if there's an effect in one area and that's the only way we can get it, right? Like you're talking about, like, oh, there may be some of these things with intermittent fasting, but you can do the same thing in other ways that don't lend themselves to restriction and this obsession and preoccupation with, oh, it's 9:47, I can't eat until 10, that kind of stuff. And I think that's important. I think along, what was the last thing you said? There was a thought I had from that bounced off. I remember the thought. I just don't remember what you said. Anyway, I think if we look at something like a low carb diet or intermittent fasting, one of these kind of fad diets, is we really kind of miss out on the way that weight loss works, right? So the way weight loss works is we have to take in fewer calories than we expend, right? If we take in more calories than we need on a daily basis, we're going to gain weight. If we take in fewer, we lose weight. There's a bunch of things that influence that, and that can fluctuate throughout, the days, weeks, whatever. But if you want to lose weight, you've got to eat fewer calories than you're taking in. Okay, that's got to happen. So what these fad diets and what these restrictive diets miss is that whole piece, right? Because there are people who promote and preach and make a lot of money selling the idea that if you just cut out your carbs,
right,
if you just go keto and keep your carbs under however many grams a day, you can eat whatever you want and you'll lose weight. This is a very popular idea. If you do intermittent fasting, well, in that 8-hour window of where you eat, you can do whatever you want, because
have a buffet.
There's this little magical thing that happens where calories no longer matter, and it's just not the case. And you take something like a low carb diet. Well, what are you replacing that with? There's a good chance that if you're not eating breads and tortilla, whatever, these carbs, that you're replacing a lot of that with fats, which are great and healthy, but they're very calorically dense and they add up really quick. I mean, you take like a handful of cashews or almonds,
Right.
You got a lot of carbs or a lot of calories in there,
Yeah.
And so we think that there's this, again, this little magical thing that happens, and we no longer have to worry about the amount of calories we're getting because I'm cutting out X, or I'm not eating between X and Y or whatever. And so now I can just do what I want following these parameters. And it completely misses the boat on how metabolism works, on just, the whole physiological processes of weight gain, weight loss, homeostasis, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't say, I'm going to go gluten free, and then that's the end of your plan. You can't say, I'm going to
Right.
go low carb to lose weight, because I've known a bunch of people that have gone on these plans and have gained weight
Mm-hmm.
because they think, well, I'm doing the magic bit. I've got the little magic spell in the mix, and it negates everything else. And it just doesn't. It does not
Right.
work that way in any
Right.
way.
Which you're exactly right. And that's why it's so important to ask, well, what are you eating instead? Or, what are you replacing that with? You mentioned the cup of cashews or whatever. I remember when I was doing this corporate wellness job, one of the guys who had an office very close to mine came in one day and was kind of chatting to me about snacks and, office snacks and that kind of thing. And he goes, what I'm baffled by? I really started tracking my calories on this app. I don't know what he was using. And just to see where it's coming from. I've been doing this low carb thing. Do you know how many calories are in a cup of almonds? And I was kind of like, well, yeah, I could probably, do some quick
Like
math in my head and
1,000.
estimate it. But I was like, a cup? Did you just say a cup of almonds? And he goes, well, yeah. I mean, I'll grab a couple big handfuls in the afternoon. That'll be my snack. And I was like, okay, a cup of almonds is a lot of freaking almonds. Like that's a
That's a
big
lot of almonds.
portion.
Yep.
And foods that are calorically dense like that, yeah, I mean, a cup of peanut butter, has
Add up
it's a
real
lot
quick.
of calories in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, people are sometimes shocked, and it speaks to exactly what you're saying. Like the diet industry tells us, do this magic thing,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden, your weight loss dreams will be realized, or you'll,
Yeah.
health, or you'll feel better, you'll have all this energy and mental clarity. But then when you do really get into like, well, what actually makes a healthy human in terms of nutrition balance and food satisfaction
Right.
and nutrient composition of the diet, all of a sudden those things are lost, and the calories are lost, which is
Mm-hmm.
why another thing is, if it fits your macros, that's another one. Fiber is not a macro.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people go into that thought that like, oh, if it fits your macros, I can eat whatever I want. Well, you know, food is made up of macronutrients. And so you could be eating just all of this crap and not getting the right
Mm-hmm.
nutrients for your body.
Yeah.
And you're kind of neglecting this whole very important component of nutrition and health and weight loss that comes from acknowledging that foods have different virtues. All foods have different virtues and can
Right.
fit in a way that works for you. So that's
Yeah.
the other piece, is how is that working for you? Let's
Right.
pay attention to how you're feeling, if this food is satisfying, if you're eating that lentil pasta and really wishing that it was real pasta, if you're eating that lettuce wrapped burger and really wishing you had a bun,
Right. Yeah.
or if you're drinking this celery juice and really wishing you could just eat yogurt for a snack instead. There's all of these things that, and we could get into the psychological side of that,
Mm-hmm.
what restriction creates in your mind.
Right. Right.
When you tell yourself, when you go, let me just take a pause here and ask the listener to think on this for a second. Think of a time when you have gone into in an intentional restrictive mindset with food. Maybe it's dry January. Maybe it's I'm eliminating sugar. Maybe you have tried a very specific fasting protocol.
Mm-hmm.
I think for some people, maybe the newness of it and the new shiny, like sexy way of doing, I'm going to do this thing, sometimes exhilarates them and they don't have a problem with it. But a lot of times, I think that our listeners would probably say, yeah, there's a little maybe fear there, or that food all of a sudden sounds a little more appealing, or maybe your quote last supper just has like a ton of that one food or whatever in it, because I can't eat this again.
Right.
It's on the forbidden list now.
Right.
I shouldn't eat it.
Right. And if I
So
do, I'm
there's
a
a
piece of
lot of
crap.
psychology that goes into that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think too, I think there's often an assumption that to be healthier, man, you've got to like just, it's going to be rough, right? Like
Oh
it's
yeah.
got to be tough. Like if you're not miserable, you're not doing it right. I mean, we see that with like in the fitness world, like you just got to kill yourself in your workouts. Like if you're not going to pass out or puke, then you don't work hard enough. And I think we see that with nutrition a lot too. Like this is just going to suck. And you just need to suck it up and get some grit and get some self-control, you pansy. Like just do this. And it's like, so I think a lot of times people approach it with like, oh, this sucks. I'm doing it right. And there's like an excitement about, like, okay, like I'm not having any of the things. I'm not eating here between these times. I'm not doing that. I'm not, whatever. And it's miserable. So I'm doing this right. And then eventually it gets to a place where like, it's just miserable. I don't want to do this anymore because it's not
Right.
sustainable to do that way. But I think there is sort of this like, not even unspoken, because I think it's spoken pretty frankly a lot, but of just like, this is going to suck. It's going to be miserable. And, it's just brace yourself for really not enjoying this process, like the
Yeah.
whole, like, and I think we talked about this recently, like nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. It's like,
Yeah.
screw that mindset. That is so stupid.
That person has clearly never had cheesecake.
Right. Or just the idea that you can't be healthier and include these things that taste amazing. This idea is like, you're going to have to suffer for it.
Right.
Like be prepared to suffer,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the price you have to pay for being so careless about your health. Now
Right.
now it's time to pay, and it's just like,
yeah.
And so of course restriction fits the bill, because I mean, that's the most miserable thing out there, is to take away everything you enjoy.
Yep. There's this belief that the only way to get to that whatever enlightened, energetic, skinny, successful, you fill in, the adjective,
happy
the
with
only
myself,
way to get there
whatever,
is through the path of like misery and restriction. Now, I will say I am a big fan of discipline. I consider myself to be a very disciplined person. And there have been a lot of things that I have engaged in with my professional racing and even my own attention to proper nutrition as it relates to performance, and just being very specific about when I eat, the composition of that meal, that kind of stuff. I've gone that route.
Right.
And I have had people say to me, oh my gosh, that's so hard, you must be blah blah blah, that must be miserable, or you can't have this, or so maybe from the outside looking in on someone's life, it this kind of speaks to what works for some people doesn't always work for everybody else. So when you do read about these protocols or restrictive diets or fad diets or elimination of this or that, be honest with yourself. Are those foods that you really enjoy? Do you like counting calories and macros? Do you like scanning in all your foods to an app? Some people totally jive with that stuff.
They dig it.
And they love it. And I'm not saying that's the wrong way to do things. I'm just saying be very honest with yourself and ask yourself, is this working for me? Is it just an adjustment that I'm going to kind of adapt to, or is this just not working at all?
Yeah. And I think too, what is the outcome you're going for? Because if you're performing at an elite level, like you've got to do things in more extreme ways because you're pushing limits, right? If you want to lose 20 pounds and have more energy and be able to run around with your kids better, like you don't need, that's not a physically elite thing. It's like this stuff needs to match what we're wanting to do. Like I've never had any need in my life to be extreme about my nutrition or my exercise, because none of the things I want to do warrant that. Like I want to feel better. I want to age well. I want to sleep well. I want to have energy with my kids and, that kind of stuff. So my approach needs to match that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you're performing at an elite level, there's a different thing there. But most of you listening to this, most people out there, most people out everywhere have zero need to do these extreme things because you're not performing at an elite level, and that's some of my frustration with like some of these, like extreme fitness stuff. It's like it makes it seem like, mom of two kids needs to be performing at an elite level,
Yeah.
yeah, you need to learn to clean and jerk and snatch, and your deadlift needs to be over 300 pounds. Like, for what? This is ridiculous. No, she doesn't. She just needs to feel better, and have some more energy and eat some more vegetables. Like, that's what she needs to do. Move her body a little more often. And it's just like, I feel like the fitness industry just sabotages that stuff a lot with this,
Yeah.
again, this idea of like, it's got to be extreme and you're a warrior and, you
Right.
know, I'm not going to say that. I'll get in trouble if I say that. Bite my tongue. It almost slipped out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You caught yourself.
I did.
Okay. So I will play a little bit of devil's advocate and say that also there is a place for just sticking to the basics of good health and nutrition and not going to extremes, even when you have super big,
Sure.
fitness goals
Yeah.
or whatever, lifestyle goals. So for me, this was a really important perspective to always keep, because if I did get too far into like micromanaging a certain aspect of my training or my life, or my nutrition, I had to be honest with myself. And again, is this working? What am I hoping to accomplish? What are the potential trade-offs and outcomes that I'm after with this? Most people have a really hard time being honest with themselves about that, especially if they have read in some article or on the website or their friend reported to them that this restrictive diet or this dietary pattern works for me. So we're always kind of looking externally for this like
Right.
validation that what we're doing is right and what we're doing will lead us to that path, instead of really just checking in with ourselves and also looking at, I mean, back to the whole hormonal adaptations that people are seeking with this intermittent fasting. Shit, if you want that to happen, just get an extra hour of sleep, for heaven's sakes.
Right.
Or like, maybe do some
Yeah.
stress reduction,
Right.
because there's a lot of evidence that says our lack of sleep as a society and always trying to be, quote, productive and putting that pressure on ourselves actually can produce more profound hormonal, shifts than these very specific dietary patterns.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to look at, is the whole picture.
Right.
What are you
Right.
trying to accomplish? Is it working for you? What are the trade-offs? And what are some other things that can help me get, where I want to go?
Right. Well, and there's some good evidence too to suggest. I mean, people will talk about, the like the physical toll of, let's say someone's obese, like the physical stress on the body and how that impacts, health markers and that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that mental and emotional stress impact those things way more than physical stress does.
Mm-hmm.
That how we manage stress, the anxieties we carry, the way we worry and we cycle through, our concerns, and we just like we live in this heightened state of just like hormonal stress from this response to like how we're living life, and in our heads and that kind of stuff is way more a way better indicator of having some serious health issues. It's
Yeah,
important to look at that stuff, and
totally.
and we've said it before, a few times at least, and we'll probably say it a bunch more. Like, that's why you have to look at, when we're making an attempt to be a healthier person, everything. How does this impact my family? How does this impact my sleep? How does it impact my recovery? How does it impact my emotional well-being? How does it impact the way I'm thinking about myself and my relationship with food? And, all these other things that may be more important than what you think is the most important thing.
Right.
You
And
know?
I'm so glad you brought up the whole living in a constant state of stress or, emotional turmoil, because a lot of people think if I were just more disciplined, if I
Mm-hmm.
just counted calories more closely, if I just stuck with it, it would be fixed. Well, what
Yep.
is it? What are you trying to fix? Because a lot of times it's not the calorie counting that's going to save you.
Right.
It's not the calorie counting and the sticking with a diet that is actually at work here.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably some kind of emotional, psychological self talk, you know, story time in your head
Right.
that's working on you too and
Mm-hmm.
needs to be addressed as well.
Yeah.
And this is why when people do go on this, very restrictive kind of diet, and then they either tire of it, they may encounter some negative health consequences with this diet, or they simply life just shifts and it's not practical anymore. What happens? A lot
Mm-hmm.
of times the weight comes back on. I start feeling crappy again. I
Yeah.
don't have the energy to do this. I resort to just old, habits with food and what I keep around. And a lot of times it's because that emotional, psychological piece has never been addressed.
Right.
All you did was start counting calories and go into this restrictive place. And how many times have people said, like, I can't wait to have X again?
Yeah.
I can't wait to eat this food again, or I can't wait for the holidays to come because, quote, it's a vacation
Yeah.
from the thing, the
Right.
restriction.
Right.
So, when you talk about like this, we have these obese individuals who are living in this constant state of emotional, psychological stress and also physical stress. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
way that manifests in your body physically, those should be addressed as well as the nutritional aspects
Yeah.
of eating.
100%. Yeah. Because I think, it's easy for us, and I get why, because I think society beats us over the head with this messaging, but it's easy for us to think that our bodies are the problem, like our weight is the
Mm,
problem. But your body weight, or the amount of, body fat you're carrying, that is a result of internal processes, right? It's not like it just happens to appear because, for whatever reason. But we approach it as like that's kind of the case, right? Like we just need to get the weight off and then things are fine. It's like, no, why is the weight there in the first place? Right? Like why do you consistently overeat? Why do you consistently eat into a place where you're uncomfortably full? Why do you mindlessly snack every evening? Like these are the things that matter. These are the things that need to be addressed. And no amount of restricting, it doesn't even touch those. In fact, it intentionally avoids those things because
yes.
I just need to lose 20 pounds. No, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You need to figure out, why you eat mindlessly. You need to figure out why your life is so stressful and da da. And then
Right.
those things very well may result in losing the 20 pounds because
Mm-hmm.
that's the issue going on. It's this
Mm-hmm.
internal stuff. We're living in turmoil, right? Emotional, mental, hormonal, whatever. We're just living in this sort of turmoil. And that's the problem. But these restrictive diets, they don't even go there,
Right.
because that's hard work. And you know what?
Right.
It doesn't make a great 6 week before and after,
I know
right? Like I
exactly.
can't take pictures of your mind and how you're thinking about yourself differently, you
Yeah.
know? And so we do the restrictive thing and like, oh, look at this 4 week difference. Look at 2 weeks. Oh my gosh, in 2 months, you lost 30 pounds. It's amazing. I want to do that. But well, look at 3 months. She gained all 30 pounds back because she
Mm-hmm.
didn't do the work. She didn't fix what's
Right.
actually the problem,
Yep.
And that's where I think so much of this just falls through.
Yeah. And let's also just acknowledge that not all weight loss is desirable.
Yeah.
Okay. So I tend to think of women who are perimenopausal or postmenopausal, and they go on these they start seeing a change in the way their body distributes fat and weight, and that's hormone related. Some of that, yes, we can learn to, some very specific changes to eating and exercise and different things that can help mitigate that. But some of it is nature. It really is.
Yeah.
So these women will, and I have worked with several, and I'm headed there myself. I mean, I've got a little time. hopefully, but I need to know about this. I need to see it coming and acknowledge and understand what's going on in my body too. So I've been doing a lot of research on this. So many women will get into this, oh, I just need to eat this calculator thing. This app tells me I need to eat 1,200 calories or whatever it is. And so they get whittled down to just very meager eating. That's not a lot to eat. Yeah. And these women are still active. They're still exercising. They're still training, riding their bikes, doing things. So they need more than that, but they're whittling down to these very low calorie diets. Well, what happens? Your body is already, because of the aging process, set up to have a harder time holding on to lean body mass. Then you're not only restricting calories that your body needs to build and hold on to lean body mass, but likely protein as well. And all of a sudden, we're seeing this cascade of, oh, well, you're losing muscle mass. So then you do get tired quicker, or you do have less energy. You don't have the stamina to go out and do the hikes or the, you go to the class that you like with your friends. And, there's a whole host of issues that come from being that restrictive. And maybe your body is getting smaller in size, but is this really serving you the way you were hoping it would? How is this serving your mental health and your lifestyle and your social health? If you are whittling down, and let's talk about social health, because maybe it means you can't go out to breakfast with
with your friends,
your family or your friends anymore, because you're so concerned about hitting this little calorie target. Or maybe it means you're going to bed hungry and literally laying there feeling your stomach so hollow because you're so hungry. These are things people have told me. And I'm just like, how does that serve you? How is that helping? It's not.
Well, and that's, I think, these restrictive diets, they make your choices smaller, but I think they make your life smaller. They make your experiences smaller. They make your enjoyment smaller. They make all these things reduced because you become so preoccupied with, I can't have that. And I'm so focused on not having that, on so much willpower going into, not doing that, or not going to the birthday party or out with friends, or, there's all these things that it takes so much of your time and attention that your world just shrinks, not just with food options, but I think in every way, and it becomes small. And I just think that's the exact opposite of what being healthier should be. I think that exercising on a regular basis and improving your daily diet, your nutrition, should make your world bigger. It should open up more experiences and opportunities and places for enjoyment and to engage and all this kind of stuff. It should make your world a bigger place in all the ways, but it does the exact opposite. And so we try to live in these small ways. I can't do these experiences. I can't eat these foods. I can't eat during these times, and everything restricts. It doesn't just restrict your options. And I mean, do you want to live a smaller life forever? Because I mean, if this is your approach and you want to maintain it, well, you got to dance with the one that brought you.
Right.
This is what you got to do now forever. I'm 40 years old. I've got a good 40, 50 years left. Like that's longer than I've lived.
I know.
Like
it's pretty intimidating to think like there's no end game to this. And I think that's a really important point, is coming from, a scarcity mindset versus this abundant kind of mindset where you are calm and you're confident and you are, I hesitate to use the term in control, but there's an element of feeling like I can do this. That, I am the master of, how I live and eat and pursue my own health. So how can we flip that from being, I can't do this, I shouldn't do that, this is off limits, I don't eat that food. How can you flip that to being, I choose to eat this because this is what it does for my body. I like this food and how it's prepared in this way. I can sit with a meal and eat until I'm completely satisfied. There's no very specific measurement and thing that has to happen here. So it's changing the way you look at food and I mean the world really and your body, instead of coming from a restrictive place of the rules and what you can and can't do. It's all about like, I'm capable and I can make these decisions. And not every day is going to go perfectly. And I'm going to pay attention to how it feels and how my body's telling me that this is going, So, I mean, back to the very beginning when you mentioned like being mindful about it, that a lot of times these, rule laden dietary patterns don't encourage you to actually sit with it and kind of feel it and be mindful about it and think about it.
Yeah.
So
it just shuts all that down. It's just check the boxes. Don't think about anything. Don't look inward. It's all outward. Your enemy is the food. You just got to conquer it.
Oh man, that whole like food being the enemy thing. I mean, that's a very common phrase with disordered eating.
Yeah.
Is that battle with food and dietary restriction and control with eating disorders. For those listeners who don't know, I did my master's research in disordered eating, and so this is an area that I work in professionally, that I feel very comfortable talking about, and I have a understanding of not just how the nutrition side of things work and the food side of things, but the psychological side of things. But often that disordered eating behavior is a form of controlling. How do I control my world? How do I cope with things that I don't know how to cope with? I don't know how to name them. I have no control over them. This is the thing that I have control over. And guess what? Because we have multiple eating opportunities all day long, I have multiple opportunities to control and to cope and to turn it on again and to succeed, to do it right.
Yeah.
And that's a whole, I mean, that's, we maybe could do an entire topic on disordered eating and what that looks like, and eating disorders, because they are two different, not two different things, but they're distinct.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Where disordered eating is a pattern or behavior that is disordered. Okay. So it basically causes a negative impact on quality of life for somebody is probably the easiest way to explain.
It would be like obsession with certain foods and not foods and certain times and obsessive.
The good and bad food. And yes.
I only have worth if I'm this size or weight, that kind of stuff.
Yep. Whereas a diagnosable eating disorder is outlined in the DSM. What do we decide? It was the DSM-5 is what we're on now.
Latest,
Yeah, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So that's another really key piece with this. People often think of diet and nutrition as just this physical kind of external thing. It's all numbers based. There's lots of science to back it up. It's, there's very specific portion and serving sizes I should have. But what did I just say eating disorders fall under? They're a mental disorder.
Yeah.
It's a psychological problem, which is why it's so important to do the work of checking in with yourself psychologically and mentally and really being truthful about what is and isn't working for you, what kinds of thought processes are at work here, because that is a huge part of, when we get into that restrictive mindset or eating patterns that are not helpful for you, there's a huge mental component, and that should be acknowledged too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you good? Did you say all the things you wanted to say?
I think so. I don't think I had anything else. I think
pretty exhaustive on the topic.
Yeah, I know. Just to recap though, you guys, if you're wanting to try a very specific eating pattern or restrictive or an elimination diet or, any of that stuff, ask yourself the right questions. What's the end game? What am I hoping to accomplish? What's the trade-off? What am I giving up here? And is this working for me?
Right.
And don't be afraid to reach out to, a health or fitness professional and ask, like, what's your take on this? Should I try this? Could I try this? How would this look? And for heaven's sakes, don't think that you have any lower worth as a human if those things don't work for you, because they are not designed to really work.
Yeah.
They're not.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them are designed
for
to
the
work.
long term, I should say.
Yeah. It's kind of like taking a prescription like that's designed to help a specific thing, and you don't have that thing, but you think that this prescription is going to help you with something else. It's like, I mean, gluten-free it's around for a reason, but for a very specific demographic.
Yeah.
It works for them because they have a thing with gluten. If you don't have a thing with gluten, it's like taking an anti-anxiety medication when you don't have anxiety. What's the point?
Right.
Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It's just ask yourself, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And why do I think that this is an answer? Because if you can't answer that pretty quickly and really well, it very well may not be the thing for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Good stuff. All right. You got a meeting in the mundane?
Meeting in the mundane. Man, nothing was mundane about my week this week. For those of you who don't know, I did this big loop through Idaho and Montana to pick up this tent top for our pickup. And, I decided I hadn't seen my family for almost a year because of the pandemic and just the way things have kind of unfolded. And so I drove up into Montana to pick up the tent, and then drove to my brother's to meet my little 2.5-month-old nephew. And then I drove to my parents. Yeah. And saw them. So I would say that, there's probably the overarching meaning in the mundane for me was just being with family, which I will admit, as an adult, there have been times when I have a family trip scheduled, or this is the time I'm going home, and I wished I'm like, I get kind of bored, like in the small town where I grew up, not really great bike riding to do. And, there's nowhere really to like eat out or anything. And so we tend to just kind of like sit at my parents' house, or I got to be moving. I like recreation. I like seeing things. I would love to go hiking, and there's just not that going on.
Yeah.
So there have been times when I'm kind of wishing like, okay, 2 days and that's it. And then we got to, go somewhere so we can ride our bikes or whatever. And this trip was the things that were just so every day, taking care of my little nephew. Every time he smiled, every time he'd go to sleep, every time he'd wake up. And it was just like this, anybody with a little baby knows that it's kind of this circular pattern of diaper changes and feedings and sleeping. And is he asleep? Is he still asleep? Who's going to put him to sleep? Who's going to go check? Oh, he needs to eat again,
It's like the same 2 hours over and over and over.
It is. It's like Groundhog Day.
Yep.
It's so lovely, though. Yeah. There is something magical about loving that very mundane process of just, this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now, is taking care of this little human and showing him how loved he is in this family. And it was my first time meeting him, and my brother and his wife are first-time parents. So there's just all of this newness going on, even though it becomes very mundane, because it is like, this cycle over and over.
Yeah.
And then playing cards with my parents. Again, I grew up playing cards. Like, a lot of people think cards are boring. We had the best time just like talking smack and like cracking jokes, and the way things would happen if somebody would win and you weren't expecting them to. And then, we could like get all up in arms about it. It was super fun. Just these things that I was kind of like, ho hum, for years were very, very meaningful for me this last week. So
that's awesome.
I cherish them. Yeah.
That's great.
They were special.
Nice. That's awesome. I'm so glad you got to go meet your nephew.
Oh, oh my gosh. And he's just so cute. So cute.
No, babies are the best.
I know. So he's getting to that smiley phase where he'll lock eyes and smile and start laughing. So yeah.
The best. Yeah.
It's exciting.
For me, so for me, it's been like a lot of little moments, because over the last maybe week or so, maybe 2 weeks, Lila and I, my oldest daughter, have started this thing where like we're sharing music with each other, like songs that we like and songs that we kind of discover, or maybe, like I've been introducing her to like punk rock, because she's like,
Oh,
what's punk
nice.
rock? I was like, okay, you got to know what punk is. You don't have to like it, but you
Oh,
got
I
to know what
love
it
it.
is. So, just introducing her to some of that, or just like songs I find like, hey, come listen to this, or come listen to this little part right here. And she'll, come into my office and be like, hey, Daddy, do you have a minute? I want you to listen to this. And it's just been the coolest thing to share, to see like, oh, what connects with her, what resonates with her, what is she like? What are the things that I show her? She's like, or what is she like? Oh, wow, that's amazing. Can I hear more of that? And it's just been these cool little moments randomly throughout the day of just us, like, each putting in a headphone and just like this little bonding moment. Cause I feel like if you really listen to music with something, it's a very bonding thing. It's
Totally.
like you
Sure.
connect in these very deep ways, even if it's for 30 seconds. And so
Yeah.
we've had all these just awesome little moments of like sharing music and talking about it and kind of breaking it down about like, oh, what'd you like? I like this part right here. Did you like this part? And it's been awesome.
Oh,
It's been awesome. Yeah, it's been very fun.
cool.
And I think it's something that's just going to continue to grow. And I think that's something that we'll just share through our lives together, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
Very cool.
Yeah, you gotta get her going on some of the classics,
Mm-hmm.
that you grew up with. Have you seen those guys on YouTube, those two brothers
I've
that
seen a
listen to
couple
music for the
videos.
first time?
Yeah.
Like Jolene, I think by Dolly
Mm-hmm.
Parton was one that they listened to, and they listened to
Phil Collins in
was
the
it
air
Sticks?
tonight.
Oh yeah, Phil Collins. Yeah.
That was a great one.
Oh my
When the
gosh.
drums come in, they're like, what just happened?
What? Yeah. And they're just the way their faces,
Mm-hmm.
like
Love it.
think of the first time that I mean, I can think of some of the first times I've heard some music that my parents loved that I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, like this
Yeah.
is, crazy, like
Mm-hmm.
visceral reaction to this
Yeah.
music. It's
Like my,
cool.
I'm responding to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been very cool.
Awesome.
Cool.
Cool. Um,
All right.
Thanks for listening, you
Yeah.
guys.
Thank you.
And we're getting comments and feedback all the time. We love it.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it
Sure
coming.
do. Keep it coming.
Subscribe and leave us a review and
Email
share it with
us,
friends. Yeah.
middleish at
We'd love to keep
gmail.com.
going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All that good stuff.
Okay.
All right.
Well, have a good week and
Thank you.
thanks for checking in.